Okay, thank you, Craig. So, thank you for having us along today. It's really good to come to such a really nice and new and exciting event at such an important time where we're seeing a lot of, what I think, quite depressing changes in our environment. I mean, I just sat through the last film that we had, and it's just a real eye-opener, isn't it, as to the changes that we're going through. So I'm just going to talk a bit about today the work that I do as an ecologist. I didn't want to assume that you knew what an ecologist was. I'm sure most of you do, so I've started by putting a little slide up just to explain who I am and what I do. So ecology is another one of those ologies. Ecology is the study of living things in relation to their environment. So I've spent the last 20-odd years of my life first starting out studying ponds and wetlands and looking at all the little sort of beasties and algae and all sorts of things that live in these wet, smelly places. I expanded out into looking at newts and looking at alien pondweed for my PhD. So somebody's got to do it, and that's what I chose to do my specialism in. But since then, I had to expand out, and I went on to look at bat ecology. So I do a lot of work with bats and dormice. And my favorite species, everybody asks me, what's my favorite species to work with? And my favorite is the adder, because the adder is in real trouble, and it's a really misunderstood species. So it's something which I spend a lot of time trying to get people to understand better and even to love. It is possible. I am from Wales. I was working there on a big project called Adders Are Amazing before I came over to live with my now husband in Bracklesham. So if you speak to me later, ask me about adders. I've got adder skins there to show you as well. So that's what I do. I look at animals in their natural environment and plants. I'm a botanist as well. I try to make an assessment when I go to any sites. I've worked a lot over the years in development sites. And I try to see, before anything happens in an area, is there anything that's special here that needs to be looked after? I mean, open countryside in itself is special. We can't forget about that. But it's my job to go and see, are there any particularly special features that are here which need to be taken care of? Can we redesign what's going on somewhere to minimize the impact? And a lot of this does go on behind the scenes, which you might not be aware of. So that's what I do, and now in my new role with COOMBES, that's exactly what I carry on doing. So again, I will go on to show you some of the habitats that we have, particularly on the railways, which again, a lot of people don't really get to see because it's obviously out of bounds for a lot of people. There's a lot out there. So I now go out with my amazing team of ecologists, and we again try to find, are there things, are there places which are more special, are there species which need to be looked after before we do some of the works that need to be done for safety reasons. So just another term up there which is going to come up again is biodiversity. So again, you probably have heard about this word, and it literally just means the variety of life on Earth. It's how variable, how many species that we have in a particular area. Some areas are very biodiverse. They have lots and lots of different species, and some are less so. So I'm going to be talking about how biodiversity is really important, and also trying to link that up to climate change. So why is it important to have lots of different species? Why don't we just all have nice green lawns, nice tidy environments? Because obviously, surely that's much safer and better for humans to just have it really tidy, safe, no thorns, nothing too dangerous. Well, actually, the more diverse the environments that we have around us, the healthier those ecosystems are. And if we have healthy ecosystems and a healthy environment around us, which is full of lots of different species, and I'm not talking about just the adders, which I love, or the fluffy things like the dormice. I'm talking about the bacteria, the bugs, the insects, and not just the ones that benefit us. These are all the things which give life out there and support all of these amazing ecosystems. Because in and of themselves, they're valuable, but without them, we'd be in a big heap of trouble, because they actually carry out a lot of services for free for us to make sure that we can live. It's not all about us, but that is obviously a key consideration when we're trying to be alive on this planet with them. So having a biodiverse environment is really, really important. It literally gives us the air that we breathe. Without all of these things working together out there, we really struggle. Unfortunately, though, and this is just a look just at the UK, we are losing at an alarming rate the amount of variety of life that we have in our natural ecosystems. So this graphic here, this just shows the priority species. So these are species which we have identified as needing particular care. And their abundance has dropped by about 60% since 1970. So that's how many of these, just the priority species, have decreased. We've lost nearly half of our biodiversity since the Industrial Revolution. We have lost 400 species, which have just gone completely extinct in 200 years. And these are species which are now gone from the UK. That's it. Game over. Which I think is depressing, but quite shocking. And it's now our chance to try and stop this from happening anymore. We actually are standing, I think, let me just get my numbers right. Don't want to tell you. Right, in the next 100 years, so in 200 years, we've lost 400 species. The current estimates in the next 100 years is we could lose another nearly 1,200 species. These are species which are right on the brink right now, that if we don't act, in 100 years, we're going to lose that many again. It's really quite shocking. And then if we actually look at the species themselves, if we look at dormice, which everybody loves a dormouse, they're very, very cute and sleepy and cuddly. But since 2000, so we're only talking 23 years, dormouse populations have halved. These are things which often are seen as holding up development and progress, but these are really big. I've got even worse figures. So we could be losing our adders completely by the year 2032 if current trends continue as they are now. This is the estimation. We've also got bats, another of my favorite species, 17 of which we've got in the UK. If we just look at our most common species of bat, the pipistrelle, the common pipistrelle, those numbers between 1978 and 1993, 70% of their populations wiped out. Again, this is a species which we think, oh, they get in the way of development, oh, I've got to get a bat survey done. But this is why we have to do those, because they have rapidly declined and largely due to human use. And then I think the worst statistic, which is awful, again, it is a cuddly animal, so it is extra sad when we think about this. This is happening with bugs and beasts as well, but just in terms of species which we're familiar with, there are British iconic species, hedgehogs. We have lost 97%. We've only got 3% of that population left, and that's since 1950. There's something terribly wrong with what we're doing, and don't worry, it'll get better. My talk, that is. So what's causing these threats to biodiversity? Why are we losing them at such a rate? And why is the UK in the top 10 worst countries in the world for biodiversity loss? This isn't just the Amazon. This is right here. This isn't something far away, which is somebody else's problem. This is us. Every single one of us is having this impact. And it is being caused largely by this image on the left, which is loss and fragmentation of the habitats. It's because there are so many of us, whether we like it or not, there are a lot of us here now, and we need to eat. We've intensified our agriculture to meet that demand for food. And if you make the fields bigger, you take out the hedgerows, you take out the woodland, this is what happens. These are where these species used to live. We've gradually nibbled away at it. We've developed it, and this is what happens. We have issues in woodland management. We get inappropriately planted woodland. You get upland areas being planted with coniferous plantation. But these upland heathlands are some of the most diverse habitats in the world, and yet we plant conifers on them. It just doesn't seem quite right. You get increased, as there's more of us, again, we don't like to think of it, I love to get people out into the environment. The more of us who go out into these places, the more disturbance there is. I'm not saying don't go out, but when we do go out, because there's more of us there, these animals, especially things like adders, who are out there trying to have a nice sunbathe in the sunshine, if they've got 1,000 dog walkers passing their spot where they like to sunbathe every day and they have to move 1,000 times a day, it has an effect on them. It's just something to think about. And we've also got non-native invasive species, so things like Japanese knotweed, rhododendrons. These are species which have been introduced. We brought them here. Oops. Because when these species get out into the natural environment, they crowd out what should be there, and they can drastically reduce the amount of species that live in an area. We also got mink. There's animals which are causing lots of chaos as well. Pests, frogs, newts, and a great threat from fungal pathogens. And how is this all linked to climate change? Well, it's very closely linked, actually, because climate change is actually going to make things even worse. So if you have got ecosystems which are struggling, if you have got ecosystems which are becoming less and less diverse, if you have something like climate change adding yet another big stress onto that ecosystem, it is not very resilient and it will start to crumble. The more diverse an ecosystem is, the stronger it is. And the more species you have, the more chances that even if one or two of those species are lost, something will still remain there, something will still be allowing that ecosystem to function. So it sort of works both ways. Climate change will make it worse, and if we don't do something to reverse the biodiversity loss, that will make climate change even worse, because the more diverse we have our environments, the more carbon they soak up. So we've got to tackle both things right now. It's really, really urgent. Oh, gosh, sorry about that. Just have to get that off my chest. So back to the work that COOMBES do, and it will come back to talk about those things again. So as Craig has just introduced, we do work with Network Rail across the southeast and further afield, but we're based down in this neck of the woods, and we do a lot of work with them. Just some interesting stats to take our mind off climate change just for a minute. Network Rail is one of the UK's largest landowners. I think it's staggering to think they've got 16,000 miles of railway winding its way over pretty much the whole of the UK, which is about halfway around the world, which I think is quite something. On that estate, we've got 6.3 million trees, currently estimated, although most of those are less than 50 years old, which I'll go on to a reason why shortly, and 52,000 hectares of land. So even though you've got just these narrow strips, that does actually add up to quite a lot of land. And these are the kind of habitats which you get on them. So again, you might just see trees or a little bit of grass growing, but you actually get quite a lot of different variable habitats. We get different types of grasslands. You get chalk grasslands. You get wildflower meadows, just completely undisturbed. You get woodlands, scrub, wetlands. We get ditches, networks, alongside the railway to make sure that they're draining well. You get brownfield sites a lot. So this is a concreted area. You can see down here. And when you have development which suddenly doesn't exist there anymore, you get all these specialist plants and insects and animals which come and thrive in those environments, these previously developed sites. And where you've got old railway sidings which are no longer used, again, you get all of these amazing specialists starting to grow and live there. And it's one of the most valuable habitats that we actually have, even though you may look at that and go, oh, it's a bit untidy, it's actually really, really valuable. And the railway actually does form, it has a very unique flora, we'd like to say, of different species on there, and actually helps support the surrounding landscape. If you look through Google Earth, or something like that, this is a different program, but you'll see that actually the railway provides incredible highways through otherwise quite intensive areas of land. And this is just one stretch. You can see here the embankment's got scrub, it's got grassland, it's got woodland. And without that, animals in this environment would really, really struggle to move around. And it's providing much, much needed habitat. And having that beautiful south-facing bank, perfect for adders, just saying. And we do get adders and reptiles which absolutely love the railway because it's such an undisturbed environment. Imagine going there, and actually birds do exceptionally well as well. You think about roadside verges, they look like a great place to be, but if you're a bird, it's actually rubbish because they can't hear each other. That's what birds are doing all the time, they're singing. If you've got road noise constantly going. But on a railway, you get an occasional train going through. So it's actually a really, really great spot to live if you are an animal. But, as Craig has also pointed out, we do actually carry out management of that vegetation. So we don't just let it completely go. Because if you look back to the age of steam, not that long ago, this is what the Lineside estate would have looked like. It was generally burned, or if they hadn't burnt it or cleared it, then the steam trains coming through probably would have set fire to any trees and shrubs and things which were going through, and you would have ended up with actually a very special grassland that was growing there. But you didn't have any of the trees growing there that we now see. And this is not that long ago, we're talking about 50 to 100 years ago. And then after the age of steam, and we've gone on to having diesel and electric trains, management was not as much, well, it wasn't needed as much. It was costly. And so we ended up with this situation. Lots of, again, it's a wonderful environment, it's lovely woodland, but, and it is very lovely. We can still have lines which are like this, but you've probably heard of the joke about leaves on the line and so on. It used to cause a lot of headaches for a lot of people, saying there's leaves on the line, the trains aren't running. But when you get situations like this and you get loads of leaves on the line, it actually creates really, really dangerous environment because it builds up a residue on the rails and the trains just can't stop. And this does still cause now lots of accidents. And we also get tens of thousands of incidents of just branches falling down, trees coming down, climate change also making that worse. The more severe weather we have, the more trees that are coming down onto the rails. So we have to manage it. We can't just let it go wild. This is just a diagram to show you then how having all of these trees, which is a wonderful thing, has actually changed the amount of grassland that we have, the species-rich grassland. If you look at I'm not sure if this pointer works, on the light green colour there, that was the amount of really lovely grassland that we used to have on there when we used to burn it and keep it all controlled. That's all that's left of it now, because the amount of woodland has increased greatly. But that's what I wanted to draw your attention to here, is that we've actually lost a lot of that really, really good grassland. So back in 2018, we did start managing it. Network Rail did start going out there and start doing something about this because of these accidents, because of these risks. But they did start to come under a bit of scrutiny. Sometimes they were taking out too much, and people were questioning whether they were actually doing a good job of managing the vegetation on their railways. So the Varley report was commissioned, and John Varley came up with recommendations for how the Lineside estate should be managed. This led to Network Rail now have an action plan for biodiversity on their estate, to try and manage it in a much more sustainable way, to make sure that we're having a mixture of good habitats and things are looked after on the line side as well. And by 2035, the goal is to have not only no net loss of biodiversity, but to actually have gain. So it's a really positive step that Network Rail have taken. So this is what we are involved with. We are out there now trying out different techniques to see what we can do in this quite unique environment. It's a very strange environment, you think about it, because all of this area underneath these guys here on the left, that's mostly ballast. It's just stone. It's really free draining. It's a really man-made environment. So what can we do in actually quite harsh conditions to try to make it better again? Oh gosh, yes. So we've got this video just to give you an introduction to some of the work. My name is Dr. Sam Kelly. I'm an ecologist and I'm working on the Kent Lineside Habitat Management pilot on behalf of Network Rail. And we're here on site today on one of the sites that we're using during the trial, trying different habitat management techniques. The main aim of the project is we are trying out different techniques to see if we can enhance the lineside estate for wildlife, for invertebrates, for mammals, for a range of different species and reptiles, which we also have on these sites. They love these sites. We've got a range of different habitats on the sites, and the sites were chosen for that reason, so that we've got a mixture of grassland sites, a mixture of sites which have just literally bare ballast, through to some sites which have got wetland, ditches, even ponds, reed beds and woodlands as well. And what we're going to do is try different habitat management techniques in each of these sites to see which of those techniques actually enhance the sites more for biodiversity. So before we start doing the habitat management techniques, what we're doing is we're coming to the sites and we're carefully cutting back a lot of the vegetation that's on the sites already. Some of this vegetation has been building up over many years, and we've ended up with quite a lot of dominance of things like ivy, which in its own right is not a bad habitat, but it has come to dominate a lot of what's here, and brambles as well, and nettles, and a lot of false oak grass, which is dominating a lot of the sites. So what we're trying to do now is to cut back on some of these species, to clear it, so it will look a little bit tidy or maybe a little bit extreme to start with, but we're doing this very carefully. We're considering when there's reptiles on site, for example, we're doing it very carefully, not cutting all the way down to ground level at the beginning. We're doing it in stages, and once we've done that initial site management, we'll then be carrying out the techniques, and that will be coming up in this spring and summer. And then for the next few years, we'll be coming back, we'll be monitoring to see what's happening on the sites. We'll also be doing maintenance on the sites to remove any species which are starting to re-establish, which we don't necessarily want to dominate the sites, making sure that everything's kept in check. And then hopefully, at the end of the project, we'll be able to see clearly that we've enhanced these sites for wildlife. We'll be able to see which species have benefited. We might even see which species didn't do so well and how the habitats have in themselves changed. And that will inform how we go forward with managing the lineside estate across the country, which techniques will be better invested in and which ones will give us more gains for biodiversity. So that's what we're currently involved with. This is hot off the press because we're literally in the middle of this pilot project. And these are techniques which we're hoping to then roll out across the whole of the UK. So we're doing the pilot in Kent, and we're doing a range of different techniques, as I mentioned numerous times in the video. We've been looking at enhancing grassland and making more species rich. Sometimes all that takes is just a cut and just take some of the stuff which is growing a bit too vigorously off, and it's just suddenly brings a lot more diversity in. But we've also seeded some sites and ended up some really, really beautiful, diverse, flower-rich meadows. We've opened up glades and we're seeing so many more species coming through. I won't bore you with the graphs, but you can see there that we have a significant increase in the number of plant species, which are now growing on the plots that we're working on, and the invertebrates have also shown an increase as well. So this has been done by sampling heavily to see what's actually happening. This has been done really scientifically on 69 sites, sorry. So, and we're hoping to expand these trials as well. So, coming towards the end now, so what have we actually learnt from doing all of these trials and from all of the work that we do on the railway lines? So, you've probably heard of rewilding. It's a really wonderful thing to do. I absolutely applaud all of the amazing estates. If you've not been to NEP, highly recommend going to have a look around. Of course, these places haven't just let things go to neglect as such. Neglect is a bad word, to let it go wild again. They have had to include grazers into that, because if you don't, then everything just becomes one particular species. So you do have to, because we're in such a modified environment, if we just let it go, it probably would not end up quite as we want it to. So if you do just go home today feeling inspired to do something for biodiversity and say, right, that's it, I'm not cutting the lawn, we're going to leave it go completely, it's probably not going to give you as big a gain as you think it might. So you do need to manage things to make sure that biodiversity does actually arrive and keep developing. But having said that, if you do have a garden, please do decide to have a little bit left there. Wildlife doesn't like to be constantly disturbed, so when we are doing our management, is there any patch of your garden you could leave to go just a little bit wild? I have, well, my husband, much to his delight, used to have a bowling green lawn at the back, and when I moved in, I decided we're going to create meadow areas. So we have our little bowling green areas for when we put the tent up for the kids, lovely, but we also have a nice long grass areas, nice tussocky grassland. It provides nesting places for insects to go into. We have some wildflower areas, put a pond in. So having a little bit which you don't touch or you manage lightly is really, really good. But the key thing is creating mosaics. Don't have one type of habitat in your garden, even if it's a tiny garden. Try to have a little bit of grass, a little bit of trees, even if it's just a few meters. Have a tree, have a bit of grass, have a little bit of flowers over here. Something that creates a mosaic of different things, because that's how you will get more species there. And the more species that we have there, imagine every one of you now goes out into Petersfield or wherever it is you live, and everybody did this from today. That will help us tackle climate change, believe it or not. The more biodiversity that we have, the more resilient our local environment is. So just finally, these are just the things I'd really like you to take home. If you are in your garden, my biggest thing is dig a pond, please. Dig a pond. If you've got anywhere you could put even a small pond, that is one of the biggest gains you can get for biodiversity, because so many different types of animals and plants need that kind of environment. And don't manage it too heavily. During the summer when everybody was, the heat and the drought and everything, my pond, I left it overgrown around the edges, and there was always water in there, and there was always frogs lolloping around in there to keep cool in the summer. Maybe you're a business, or maybe you work for the council, or maybe you have access to some land. Maybe you don't have any room at home. Where can you retain habitat? Where can you let some habitat get a little bit more wild? And if we all did this, if we all did a little bit in our gardens, if all of us did a little bit in our local environment, we create these stepping stones, because species find it much easier to move through the environment that we've got if we just give them a little bit here and there everywhere through our towns. And if you aren't a business and you don't have a garden, join a local organisation that is doing this. So we do work with the local amphibian and reptile groups. There's lots and lots of different conservation groups out there doing wonderful things in the local environment. Could you spare a few hours maybe to get out there and help them to increase biodiversity? And if we all work together like that, I know it can feel when you see films like we just watched and you think, there's just no hope. There's no doubt that what's happening is really big, and you can feel really insignificant in it. But if everybody did just something, yes, we do need to put pressure on government to do some big stuff as well. Yes, we do need to put pressure on Network Rail and the big landowners to do things better as well. But every single one of us can do something. And it's like Greta was saying in the film just now as well. At least then you know that you didn't just sit back and watch it happen. You know that you did something. You did what you could. Even if it wasn't very much, you did something. So, thank you very much for listening.